Freedom Counsel is nothing without all of you. How do we go about getting people held criminally responsible for their acts? The military is still at risk. Election interference, the medicalization of childhood. These drug dealers like Pfizer and Moderna, we can seize their property. We develop our litigation through conferences like this. It's going to come through communications. It's going to come through conversations. And Freedom Counsel is that conversation.
For information, visit freedomcounsel.org.
I knew as early as February 2020 that I needed to do something.
I recognized that there was a systematic problem and that this was not about hydroxychloroquine, it was something larger.
Fear shut the world down, and people made a lot of money at it as they were killing us.
I was asked to speak at a freedom rally that was set up to discredit my reputation.
Whoever orchestrated this must not have the safety of this nation in mind.
Medicine and politics should be separated. These doctors were handcuffed.
The American public has awakened. We have a new civil rights movement to restore our rights, and we're going to hold them accountable.
It is a natural progression of a man of God or woman of character to see injustice, to seek it out, and then to act upon it.
Do you hear me? We will never lock down again. This is the hill we die on.
Don't miss New American Heroes with attorney Warner Mendenhall and John Davidson, Mondays on BrokenTruth.tv.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage.
And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game's won.
So with another episode of Freedom Counsel and Broken Truth, I'm John Davidson. Today I have my co-host, the lovely and talented Warner Mendenhall. Welcome back, Warner. And today we're going to talk about something that Robert Malone helped sort of recast in a new light last week, which is the potential weaponization of tick-borne illnesses, specifically Lyme disease, and how that... Yeah, sorry, my mic's working. And how that's affected the country. And today our two guests are, well, let me bring them in here, Laura Hovind and Laura Tillman, who are both experts on Lyme disease. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome, ladies. So just to sort of recap, I'll pull up the Malone article. And to be fair, Malone pulled a lot of his sources from other work that was done. I believe a book called Bitten had been written a long time ago. And what he used his platform as someone, now in the federal government. That's the wrong screen. Let me get the right screen up here. Well, it does not want to let me get the right screen up. So let's try to... Sorry, our computer is not happy with what I asked it to do just now. Let's see, can I do this? So I don't know why. It's not wanting to cooperate. So at any rate, what we're dealing with is the federal government put out, essentially, 282,000 radioactive ticks in Lyme, Connecticut, which resulted in this massive outbreak of Lyme disease. And we finally have a government official, this one being Robert Malone, discussing it. So what do you guys think about that? And I'll pull it up now. I got it. So.
I think if you're a Lyme patient or you know someone affected by Lyme, we've waited for this some sort of acknowledgement for a very long time. Many of us have known and struggled and really got no recognition or response or treatment or anything really. So in this regard, to me, this is significant.
Yeah, what I'd like to do, John, I'd like both Laura and Laura to kind of do an introduction of themselves and what their history has been and what they're currently doing, because they're long-term activists in this space. So let's start with Laura Hovind.
Hi,
Okay.
thank you, John, and thank you, Warner, for inviting us on. My name's Laura Hovind. I am the founder of Truth Cures, which is a Lyme-centered nonprofit. We're a 501c3 organization, and we've been established since 2019, but I've been doing activism for quite a bit longer than that. I started in about the end of 2013, when my daughter started having symptoms, and I eventually found out that she had contracted congenital Lyme from me. And so in a quest to figure out how to deal with that, I ended up diving into the rabbit hole, so to speak. And I learned from Kathleen Dixon, who had been very active in fighting Lyme disease and the powers that be for a decade already, even longer, I think. But she had been a scientist at Pfizer. And so she was the one who originally figured out what was really going on with the original vaccine LymeRix and how it was causing a similar illness to Lyme contracted from a tick bite. And so she taught me everything she knew, and I kind of took it from there. And I got a reputation within the Lyme community for being able to break down some of the science into easily digestible terms, and I had a blog, and I started my website later. But yeah, it just kind of kept building from there. And we did some protests and did a lot of letter writing campaigns, and nothing really seemed to stick because at the time, I think the media had become immune to following protests. Like, unless you're burning a building down, nobody will come and cover it. And so we decided later on to focus on dealing with the legal aspects and trying to pursue remedies via legal pathways.
Oh, can you guys hear Warner?
Yeah, Laura, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, my name is Laura Tillman. I began working with Laura and Kathleen. I think we got introduced somewhere around 2016. And one of my real attraction to getting to know them and, ultimately working with them more was that they really understood what was going on with Lyme disease, why you can't get diagnosed, why it's so difficult to get the treatment, why aren't insurance companies covering anything, why are Lyme patients being treated differently. I was one of the, first cohorts of Lyme disease sufferers, if you will. I think I was maybe 22 when I got a tick bite. I grew up and was living on the eastern end of Long Island at that time, near Plum Island. I had friends' parents who actually worked on Plum Island and were running it.
Wow.
This probably was after the tick-borne disease research ended, but Plum Island was very much a part of the lifestyle out there. It's where people's parents worked. The ferry was right there. People would suit up and go back and forth all the time. We were told it was agricultural. It was under the USDA, and as a local person, you never really questioned it back then. Once I had Lyme, I was given some IVs and doxycycline, and I went back to the experts, still having lingering symptoms, and they told me everything was fine. Don't worry about it. You're so lucky. you got antibiotics earlier, early, and 20 years later, 25 years later, I was still having issues. And it really wasn't until I met Laura and Kathleen that I could really understand the mechanisms of this disease and why it was so difficult to get diagnosed. At the same time, I came up to Boston and have been working in biotech, much of it biotech research. I'm not a scientist, mind you, but I was working with some of the brightest minds in the country, if not the world, and Lyme disease was just something nobody ever really cared about. So there had to be a reason why this disease was being handled so much differently than anything else.
So, wow, your family worked there?
Not my family, but I had my friend's parents work there. So aside from Chris Newby's book, which Bitten, which is much more current, there was a book many years ago, probably around 2002. It was called Lab 257, and that was written by someone named Michael Carroll. And he's an attorney as well. I think he's in the New York area. But he had interviewed, many of the people I knew. So as I was reading that book, I was like, oh, I know this person and this person and this person, right? So, it took a long time for, what was going on there to really come out. But still the government never acknowledged it until now.
So I mean, this acknowledgement is from Robert Malone, who is a board member on ACIP, right?
That's right.
And that's the CDC's essential approval arm for vaccinations and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, to name it, it's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And that platform has given him quite a voice on a lot of issues. And Lyme has been, like you guys said, essentially ignored over time. I think I'd like to, one of the things, let's get into a little bit the origins of Lyme, you guys. Tell us what you know, and I think most of the public is still not aware of the Defense Department involvement and the biological weaponry that they're working with, and that I believe is the core to some of this.
Sure. Well, if you read Chris's book and Robert Malone's summary thereof, you'll see that the government was working with ticks in multiple locations and working to weaponize them. Chris has photos in her book of ticks being force-fed with pathogenic slurries so that they could then, figure out how these ticks could spread disease. And they use different kinds of ticks because, of course, certain ticks are more able to host and then spread certain diseases. So they were working on that too. And a lot of this was going on at Rocky Mountain Laboratories in Montana. Willy Bergdorfer was one of the scientists in charge of that research. And a lot of his work is out on the internet. Utah Valley University has a database that I think is a lot of the data that Chris used for her book. And you can go and read it for yourself. It's got everything from personal correspondence between Willy Bergdorfer and other government officials, down to his immigration records when they were trying to keep him here and he's got to go up to Canada and then come back in the country, that kind of stuff. So it runs from the very mundane to the very intriguing kind of information, like his lab notes. So we know that all this was going on, and the only problem is that we don't have something that directly links what we know as modern day Lyme disease with what was going on at Plum Island and at Rocky Mountain Labs.
Well, he also confessed, didn't he, so to speak, didn't he make a dying declaration?
Sort of. It was a Post-it note on a box, so take that as you will.
What did it say? What did it say?
I don't remember. Somebody could probably Google it. It was I don't recall somebody.
It says I wondered why somebody didn't do something.
That's it. Yeah.
Isn't that the story of the modern age?
Exactly. So we're out here trying to do something as best we can, as just, measly little people, one little person out here with a website.
Yeah. In one of our conversations with the biologist, Alan McDonald, and he was featured in the documentary Under Our Skin, which Chris Newby was also involved in. He recently passed away, actually. But one of the things he had said in our conversations that, this is the worst thing the government has been involved in since Tuskegee. And I had to say, I agree. People didn't do anything. Some people, many people, because they, at least some people, they weren't telling the truth about it. So if you were someone being affected by this, like, what could you do? They kept telling you that there's nothing to worry about, nothing to look at here. And then, of course, the people that did know or should have known, many of them are not even alive anymore. So, even in terms of how we approach this, we can't undo history. So I guess the question for us is like, what can we do now?
Well, one of the things that you guys have experienced is this difficulty in treatment. And I think almost everybody I know who's had Lyme disease, especially, long-term problems, has had real problems getting treatment, getting it recognized. Could you talk about your personal pathways on the treatment side?
Sure. So I originally got sick in 1995. And at the time, I was in Chicago and there was no treatment. There was no acknowledgement that the disease even existed there. I could not get treatment. I went to half a dozen doctors and nobody knew what to do with me. The best I could get was, it looks like you have active CMV, which is cytomegalovirus. It's a herpes virus, a type of herpes virus. And usually people aren't walking around with active CMV, and they warn you not to get pregnant because it can cause really horrible birth defects. And eventually, when I went through treatment in about 2009 or so, and I was good for a little while, but all the symptoms just came cascading back. And it took me 14 years to even get a diagnosis. But after that treatment, I just went, what am I going to do? That didn't work. There's nothing else out there. Doctors will not acknowledge it. You have to find a specialized Lyme doctor, and you can only pay them out of pocket. Insurance won't cover anything. The drugs that they're going to put you on, all kinds of antibiotics and supplements, it can cost $1,000 a month or more. So, that's just not a reality that most people are equipped to face. And I certainly could not afford any of that. So I've just kind of gone rogue and went, I have to live my life, suffer in silence or whatever. And so that's what I've done. And I think it's sort of made me kind of ADHD in in some ways. And I've been able to put that energy into figuring out why this is going on and what are treatments that might be able to do something about it. I found out that Lyme actually causes immune deficiency. And so with that knowledge, in about 2015, I went to an immunologist, and rather than saying I have Lyme or I have this or that, I said, I've been having symptoms that make me think I might be immune deficient. Can you test me? And so I got all my immunoglobulin levels tested, including IgG subclasses 1 through 4. And they did a vaccine challenge on me to show that The vaccine did not increase my titers to the different strep pneumo strains. It actually made them tank. And then I tested for CMV again, and lo and behold, I again had active CMV. And so that was the one thing that pushed the insurance company to actually cover my treatment, which was intravenous immunoglobulin therapy, because they didn't want me walking around with active CMV and getting pregnant ladies sick. So I did that for about 5 years, and then I went off the IVIG too. So I'm going rogue out here with no treatment.
Wow. And Laura, your situation?
Yeah, well, one of the things about Lyme, they call it the great imitator. So you'll see just even with Laura and I, there's overlap in our experiences, but how it affects you, every person, it's a little bit different. So I think I was maybe 93, 94. I woke up one morning and I couldn't stand up. I could hardly walk. I was like stumbling around like a drunk person. Unfortunately, I was home alone that morning. God, if I had to do it today, I would call an ambulance because I really shouldn't have been driving. But somehow I managed to crawl to the car and get to the emergency room. They saw that I had some sort of infection. It looked like I had some sort of abscess on my back or something. So, they cut that out and gave me intravenous antibiotics the whole day, and then had me come back the next day. And then they said, okay, follow up with your doctor. Nobody really knew the origin of this. When I did follow up with my doctor, I showed them, hey, take a look at my back. When they looked at the back, I had the big red bullseye. At this point, I was on the east end of Long Island in the Hamptons, so people were just starting to hear about Lyme. And I remember the doctor looking at my back and seeing the rash and saying, wow, you've got Lyme disease. Do you mind if I call my nurse to come in and take a look at the bullseye? I want her to be able to recognize this when, other patients have it, right? So I didn't have a test. I just had the bullseye. And this was pre-1994, so I didn't need a test. They just gave me the antibiotics and I took them for 2 months. It helped. I was able to go back to work, but it didn't really address all the issues. I couldn't play tennis anymore. I had some, joint issues. I had memory issues. Very fatigued, I needed to sleep a lot. And then followed up with an expert at Stony Brook, who kind of gave me a lot of misinformation. I now realize he's one of the group that has been profiting heavily off of Lyme and the cover up of what this disease really is. Eventually I did make a comeback. It took some time, but it changed my nervous system. It changed my hearing. I just remember being like maybe 23, after about a year, thinking like, wow, what are the chances that this isn't going to come back to haunt me, later in life? But I did initially make a recovery. I went, I traveled, and I did different things. 10 years later, I'm in Boston, and all of a sudden I start having some weird symptoms that don't make sense. They're not Lyme, clearly something to do with my immune system. Having issues that people with a healthy immune system wouldn't really have. Saw many experts, got bad information, bad treatment, things that made things worse. Ultimately, what I figured out is that I didn't need antibiotics, but it was an antifungal that helped me. Yet I have no fungal disease diagnosis. And so it never made sense. How is it that a simple antifungal like fluconazole, which is cheap and mostly easy to get, is making such a big difference in my life? And it really wasn't until Kathleen explains the science of Lyme and OSPE, outer surface protein A, is fungalish in nature. So if you threw an antifungal at it, for me, that worked better than an antibiotic. So again, I got back on my feet, and at the 20-year mark, I had issues with my bone marrow production, right? And so again, going back to the science that Kathleen and Laura were, working through and communicating out more broadly to the Lyme community of patients is Lyme tolerizes your B cells, right? That's why it can mimic certain kinds of cancers. So, at that point, now I was involved in something quite serious and recovering from the bone marrow thing. Fortunately, I did. And if you're a patient, I guess that Laura and I are here and living, normally is a testament to people keeping their hope and not giving up. But yeah, I mean, just clobbered. So yeah. So, really looking at the science of this solved a lot of the mysteries. Because if someone points you to the right paper and the right research, you can see you can in the science, in the abstracts, in the conclusions, in the data, you can see like, okay, wow, this is why this has been happening to me. Because so many of the people would try to blame you for your disease, right? Or tell you to go see a psychiatrist, or even if you're dealing with a family member, right? They don't understand either. All they know is that they have a kid that's sick and the doctor is saying they're not sick and the kid is saying they are sick. And they don't understand why. So working with Laura and Kathleen really deepened my understanding and gave me tools to work with, the physicians, work with my family members, argue with an insurance company, whatever it is that I needed to do to get to a better place.
And one of the things, and John, jump in. I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate the questioning here. But one of the things that I've been, very concerned about, and we actually saw a lot of parallels emerge with COVID, is that the doctors that were willing to experiment and try to treat were getting slammed. And in fact, I think I read somewhere that over 50 doctors have had their licenses taken over Lyme disease treatments that they were providing. I don't know if that number is correct, by the way. That's something I happened to see. And then, we see the same pattern. We have a DoD project, meaning, the COVID-19 organism itself, and then the shots that followed up. And then the doctors that are trying to treat it are suppressed, licenses are at stake, and we've been fighting that battle quite a bit. So I guess I'd like to talk about what physicians faced and your difficulty in terms of finding someone who'd be willing to address the illness, and what you know about that.
So many parallels, so many. And just real quick, I want to mention, I think yesterday, a report came out, I think it was from UMass, saying that, lo and behold, COVID causes long-term immune suppression. And that's exactly what we're dealing with Lyme. But it's not only immune suppression. You've got both immune deficiency and autoimmune issues going on at the same time. I have all kinds of crazy autoimmune issues. Now, if I wanted to go and get treatment for any of my autoimmune stuff, I'm sure they'd be happy to put me on steroids for the rest of my life, because they're cheap and it's easy and insurance is going to cover that. But the immune deficiency part, nobody wants to address. That's what we're dealing with here. And that's why doctors have been put out of business, because think about the history here. Laura and I are both talking about early 90s. What have we just come out of in the early 90s? The exposure of the AIDS epidemic, HIV AIDS, and how horrible were the 80s in that regard. I have found in my travels that some of the same government officials who were involved in manipulating the Lyme disease case definition and diagnostics were also involved in manipulating the HIV case definition and diagnostics. It's nuts. And so the people who came up with the Lyme case definition, scientists at New York Medical College, Yale, UConn, and other really, vaunted academic institutions, they're the ones who decided what the case definition is going to be. And what that means is when you go to a doctor to get diagnosed, you have certain signs and symptoms, and you have to check their boxes. So testing is one of those boxes you have to check off. And these same people created the testing algorithm. They created the tests. They're profiting from the tests. So they create these crappy tests that nobody can test positive on. And I don't know. People can't go and get treatment because they're not able to get diagnosed. But these guys, so they're just making money on the tests and not having to treat anybody. So they're famous Lyme doctors, but they do nothing but make money on the tests. And these same guys, when I got into activism in, like 2013, 2014, they were very active in going after doctors who were treating Lyme, who were trying to help people get better. Now, at the time, nobody knew really what was going to get people better. So, they would claim that, these doctors are using untested treatments. Granted, some were. There were a few. There's always going to be a bad apple in the barrel, right? So there were a few who got taken out because they were actually using harmful treatments. But for the most part, they were trying to help people whose lives had been shattered. They were unable to work or unable to go to school. They were bedbound. And this is why I started doing this, why I got involved in the first place, because I thought, man, if I'm still on my feet and these people are stuck in bed and can't do anything, can't work, can't go to school, can't take care of their kids, and I have this knowledge, I need to do something about it, and I need to use it to try to help people.
We've I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Laura is touching on something I think is really important here, which is a lot of the people who were the lead investigators on Lyme, at that time had to come up with a way, or were looking for a way to profit off of their profiteer off of their recombinant DNA. And you could not really make a lot of money off of doxycycline, but you could make money off of diagnostics and vaccines. And so this was the way for them to profit, right? At the same time, you had the rise of HMOs. And if you really looked at the literature and the experts, they were saying that Lyme is as expensive to treat as cancer. And at that time, a lot of people wanted IV antibiotics, which was expensive. So, by rigging the diagnostics, manipulating the case definition, it all really served to prop up the vaccine, which we know doesn't work. They knew it didn't work. It kept the money rolling in. And also covered the government piece, right? Because nobody had to look at like, hey, why is this happening? And where did this disease come from? People will argue, okay, well, ticks have carried bacteria for 5,000 years, but the ticks that you have today, they're carrying 4 or 5 different things. And I think that is kind of goes back to Chris Newby's book, what were they doing in those laboratories, and how did this become so virulent? And designed to take your immune system down.
If we hadn't gone through COVID, I don't know if as many people would be aware of the gaslighting that occurs with institutionalized medicine in conjunction with the Department of Defense and everything else. But that's sort of the silver lining of COVID, was now we kind of all get it. And now this, dark psychology of medicine, where they lie to patients, where they try to, manipulate you into confusion about what's going on with your own body, has come out. To that end, Warner, what does a reckoning look like for this industry? Because you've spearheaded lawsuits galore, and some make some progress, and others are shut down and by the DOJ, even like with Brooke Jackson's case. Is there any possibility for a class action lawsuit against the United States government or the DOD? for these patients like Laura and Laura?
Well, I mean, the problem is there's sovereign immunity with our federal government, so that's not going to be the best course of action. What I think that the course of action that's available to us, for one, these testing protocols are falsified. The data does not properly back up the testing mechanisms. I mean, and I hate to say it, it's not just Lyme; it's lots of different testing. But certainly we need to look at, exactly what you guys just pointed out is where are the profits actually being made, and they're being made in testing and vaccines and all these other ways. Well, a lot of that's fraudulent, and that can be gone after. And not that it's easy, but it can be gone after. So, I think we need to look at the companies and the around this that are making money basically on what I'd call vaporware. You look at their clinical trials; they don't add up. And we know that the clinical trials across the drug industry have been a problem. So those are sort of the ways that I want to look at it. The other thing that's really critical here and has been critical, again, we can cross over to other domains, but is to defend the doctors and the practitioners that really want to help people. And because we've got to have, our doctors, should be working as scientists in a sense, testing ways to treat it and finding ways forward instead of having their licenses come under attack. So we need to make sure as lawyers, I think that's one of the roles that we can play, is to at least protect those people who are willing to step up and try to do something. So we certainly have a role there. And then, finally, I think just the exposure as to where this stuff comes from. I mean, we're not properly addressing people who have Lyme disease and the long-term consequences. And just like you guys said, the insurance industry, we got to make sure that it's recognized, that it's treated, and that it's going to be dealt with at a national level. I mean, that's one of the things that I hope is happening under this administration is, they do seem to be expanding what they'll consider, and they're, beginning to hear from victims of these processes.
One of the areas that I would say the awake doctors came from was, independent practice versus, like I said, the institutionalized medicine, the big hospitals. Mary Bowden's fight against Houston Methodist is a great example of how an institutionalized organization tries to crush an independent doctor who makes connections that they don't approve of.
Well, 100%. I mean, the whole thing that happened, I think most people know this, back in the 80s, 80% of doctors were independent. And now 80% are part of some institution. And their prescribing and the way they're treating patients is tracked through the electronic health record, which has caused, it's essentially surveillance over doctors and patients. And then the discipline comes down because it's all in that electronic health record. And if it's not been approved by the corporate overlords, then we got a problem on our hands. And that is completely contrary to the way medicine is supposed to be practiced. I always understood medicine to be an art. And you have to deal with every patient individually as they come in and their particular situation, and you test and you try again. But now we have these protocols that get laid down through the institutions, even through the government. We saw that with COVID. And then you deviate from those protocols, you're off the standard of care. And they scare all the doctors by saying, well, if you're not meeting standard of care, you're liable in malpractice. Well, standard of care has really become a way to control what doctors do. I mean, this is so deep, but that's just a quick overview of what I'm seeing, and we're dealing with it in lawsuits right now.
And that's a great point, Warner, because There has never been a standard of care for Lyme. There is none. There's none. It's, they keep trying, the establishment keeps trying to make it, if you catch it on day 3 and you have a
antibiotic
bullseye
you're
rash,
good.
if you have a bullseye rash, take a dose of doxycycline and you're good.
Yeah.
That's no standard of care.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you were a congressman or a senator and you're watching this show, what's a good cause of action that they could employ to maybe help alleviate the stress of this situation on our medical system? Would it be to enact legislation that perhaps encourages a blossoming middle class for doctors to start their own practices, maybe some sort of collective malpractice insurance that makes it easier to enter into independent practice again? How do we fix this?
I have a suggestion.
I'd love to hear it.
But it's not so much on the doctor side, it's on the CDC side. But the CDC needs to flip Lyme back to being a clinical diagnosis. No one should need to get test positive on any of these unreliable and in some cases rigged testing. A doctor being able to just make a clinical diagnosis with the patient in front of them. You can do a test if you want, but in most cases, the patient will have a rash or they'll have found a tick or they'll be living in an area. Now Lyme is all over, but we all know the high seasons of Lyme. If a patient comes in and they've got symptoms of Lyme disease, they should be able to clinically diagnose that patient. They can also do a differential diagnosis and rule out a whole bunch of things by all means, but those tests, any test is going to be more accurate than the Lyme test. So let's stop relying on this and allow the doctor to make a diagnosis. And when the doctor prescribes the antibiotic, allow the doctor to prescribe the antibiotic for a duration that is long enough to give that patient a fighting chance. And that's not 2 weeks, that's not even 4 weeks on antibiotics. You probably need at least 2 months. But as it stands now, if the patient comes back with symptoms and the doctor renews the antibiotics, they're going to get flagged in the system, right? So you need to give the doctors more discretion there and stop allowing these tests to stand in the way.
Interestingly, yeah, there's another tick-borne bacteria called Coxiella burnetii that also has similar symptoms to COVID. And the treatment, according to Didier Raoult, the physician and researcher in France, was to use hydroxychloroquine and doxycycline. When there's a suspected case of Coxiella, the test can take 2 weeks to get back, and in that time frame, the patient can actually go into a chronic illness. Now, by the way, this is also a biological weapon that was tested, I believe, at Fort Detrick. But Coxiella had a vaccine developed in 2017. There was a release or some sort of exposure in Maryland, in the capital, in 2017. Nobody reported on this. And when you suspect Coxiella infection, you immediately treat. You don't wait. This
like
seems
rabies.
like a good idea.
If someone's exposed to rabies, you don't wait for them to get rabies. You give them a rabies shot, right? So what I say to other people, like, living in the Northeast, it can be anywhere, but I'm in the Northeast, and that your dog is going to be exposed to ticks or whatever. If you have a good doctor and you have a good relationship with your doctor, okay, chances are if you live in this area and it's springtime, you're going to run into ticks. Keep doxycycline in your house, okay? Don't abuse it. Don't take it if you don't need it. But if you do get a tick bite and it's always a Saturday or a Sunday, or you can't get in to see your doctor, or it takes time to get a test or whatever, it's always the most inconvenient time. Just keep the doxycycline in your house and you can take it prophylactically. If your doctor doesn't trust you enough to do that, then you don't really have a very good doctor or a good enough relationship with your doctor to keep working with them. The other thing you can do now is test the tick. So yeah, you got the tick, you sent the tick out for testing. There's a couple places that will test it on the spot, but you can take the doxycycline while you're waiting for the test from that tick to come back. If you don't have Lyme, great, throw the antibiotics out. You don't need them right now, but at least this way, you're minimizing your chance of coming down with a chronic disease and having $1 million in medical costs and disability, and
And John, just to go back real quick to your question about what can legislators do, back in 2015 and 2017, we took groups to Washington, D.C. to talk with legislators about this problem. We were advised in 2015 by Jeff Sessions' office. I don't know if anybody remembers him. That was way back, but he was a senator from Alabama. And his legal staff advised us to speak with the Judiciary Committee and try to get a hearing of the Judiciary Committee so that we could advance the cause of the manipulated diagnostics through Congress and then get it addressed at the CDC and the FDA. So in 2017, we went back to Washington. We spoke with either the senators themselves or their legal staff of 75% of the Judiciary Committee at the time, and followed up relentlessly, and it went nowhere. They all dropped the ball. We even talked to Chuck Grassley's office, and he had done some work on an expose of a certain government official who was involved in harassing a Lyme activist. He had gone to her home, and he had done terrible things to her and her family and trashed her in the media using his position to do so. And so, having gotten nowhere on the political side of things, that was kind of our signal to just pull back and work on our advocacy, regroup, and try to do things through the legal route.
Was this public official's role public, what they did?
Yeah, he's all over. I mean, you can Google him. It was Edward McSwegan. And
and who did he work
the
for?
Name, you'll find all kinds of fun information about that episode.
Was he part of NIAID?
Was it NIAID? I think so. I think he was director of the Lyme program at NIAID for a while. Yeah.
Interesting.
With the new administration, are you seeing more acceptance? What are you seeing with the new administration?
Laurie, do you want to take it?
I believe RFK Jr. is forming a certain number of committees, right? Which is, that's good. It's not a bad thing. But historically, nothing has really come out of these committees at all that actually will change the life of a patient. There's some better names on these committees. So in the original committees, they would put somebody on the committee that actually was involved in profiting off of these diagnostics or vaccines. The new committee, you might have some of these Lyme doctors, and some of them are very good. Some of them I would see myself, but they're also profiting because, some of them are charging $5,000 for a patient to walk through the door. So even among, the Lyme literate MDs, there's some abuses. And so, how much are they really going to solve when they're making money off of Lyme kind of being in the framework that it is? So I think it's good. And I'm glad we're talking about it and they're starting to admit, the government's involvement. I believe Jay Bhattacharya also referenced Chris Newby's work. But what we know is almost every diagnostic that the FDA has approved to sell in the United States is based on manipulated criteria. And we know that because we met with the FDA and we started pulling out all the applications, and with their experts, we met with them. This is after going through a whole interview process to even get the door to the FDA open. And when we sat down and we looked at these diagnostics, the answer was from their diagnostic expert was, wow, none of these should have been accepted this way. So there's really nothing standing in the way of the FDA writing a letter to all these diagnostic companies saying, hey, you need to revalidate this, right? Or just pulling them off the market, right? It's now being exacerbated by companies selling Lyme disease diagnostics direct to consumer, sort of Theranos style, where, you know, you're going to take a test kit, you're going to buy it on Amazon or CVS, and you puncture your finger, and then that blood goes in a hot truck. So the FDA could take an action today. So could the CDC. They could say, you guys need to revalidate your tests. The CDC could say from now on, Lyme, it needs to be a clinical diagnosis, and no amount of Lyme testing should stand in the way of treatment, right? You know, so you don't need a committee for that, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah, this is, you know, I keep thinking about the movie Outbreak with all the different issues like this, where they were willing to blow up a town to protect their biological weapon. Life imitates art. Hopefully they won't blow up your towns. Maybe they'll actually do the right thing and correct this obvious issue. I mean, it's at what point does our government acknowledge what it's done and make it right? You know, this is the same question I have with all the other things. Maddie DeGarry was in the clinical trial for the COVID Pfizer vaccine and essentially abandoned by the government. You know, they've never been acknowledged. They've never been really helped by the institutions that helped put her in this situation. And their crime was trusting that the government would not give them something that could have hurt them.
I would say the government doesn't even have to admit that they either released intentionally all these disease ticks or oops, something got out unintentionally. They don't even have to go there. At this point, I don't care. I don't care where it came from. Let's just fix it. Can we do that? Can we just, you know, it's going to take some acknowledgement on their behalf that, yes, this is a disease of immunosuppression, and they have not been able to admit that. So they're going to have to come clean on that part, because this has been dragging on for decades. It's been 50 years now.
Right.
I mean,
but it's more than that, though. I mean, it's a neurologic disease, so you can't really have a conversation about Lyme and put it in a container without having a conversation about autoimmune, about Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or any of those things. Do I think Lyme is the cause of all of that? No, but I do think it's a factor. You know, for example, Michael J. Fox, who has got Parkinson's at 28 years old. Before that, he had Lyme, right? Mm-hmm. The way this testing was manipulated when they changed the case definition and the diagnostics is they, seems like purposely, took out anybody with the neuro version of this disease, which is about 85% of the people. So yeah, that's catastrophic to the patient. It's turned out to be quite profitable. But it also is suppressing a market. You know, as someone who has worked in the biotech industry, I mean, this is a problem that a lot of people would like to solve, but there's no market for it. Because if nobody has the disease, there's nobody who's going to benefit from the cure. And so unlike other diseases where there's advancements and research dollars and some sort of plan to offer something to these patients, Lyme has gotten nothing. So if you at least fix the testing and could get a more accurate number of who's really sick, you know, it would at least incentivize small biotechs to start coming up with treatments that, you know, maybe they could get compensated for. I mean, we've essentially, you know, squashed the free market in terms of Lyme discovery, you know, so we're no further ahead, you know, now than maybe 30 years ago because of this testing and this diagnostic scheme, which is pretty sad.
Yeah. Well, we're approaching our hour. Any final thoughts?
No, except I would never have signed up for this path when you think of all the goals that someone who's 22 years old has for their life, or even an 8 or 10-year-old child that got bit by a tick in their backyard. I mean, nobody would choose this. And nobody should have to go through what these patients had or have. So many have ended up, sorry about my dog, so many have ended up on disability or lost their home or lost their families, all because somebody, didn't believe them or wouldn't treat them.
Yeah. I see so many parallels with other things, including cancer, including COVID. I mean, it's just dramatic. It really is. And, we're certainly, and myself, just having had my legs taken out from under me in December, have a brand new understanding of what people are really going through. I'm going to use that in whatever I've got left here, use that understanding to help fight for people who are undergoing these disastrous medical issues that the government doesn't really respond to properly. And then the alternative stuff, these alternative doctors, I mean, I can tell you, I think they've been critical in my care. Okay. And they're at risk for some of the things that they're doing. So I just, I hope we can get on a better pathway. I have a lot of hope for, what Bobby Kennedy's doing and Jay Bhattacharya, and I will tell you, they've been more open to input than I've ever seen. I think this next ACIP meeting is going to be very important to watch and may provide a model for how to address Lyme. They're going to definitely address the vaccine injured, for example, at this next ACIP meeting. And so we're starting to, have a little bit different response at the federal level. Hopefully we can get that locked in and move forward in a more healthy way for our people.
Agreed. And by the way, anybody that can control attendees or guests to the ACIP meeting, I'd really like to attend.
Let me see if I can help you on that one.
Thank you. And with that, ladies, welcome. Thank you for coming to the show. And please check that dog for ticks. And
multiple times a day. Sorry for the background now. She was napping. Now she's ready to go.
I think she needs a walk.
What's your dog's name? I'm sorry, I got to ask.
Oh, her name is Flor, and she's a Vizsla, which is a Hungarian pointer, a hunting dog. So we've got many layers of prevention, high boots, the whole thing, and it is now starting to match.
Okay.
Well, she's closing out the show for us. Thank you.
Thank you both. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.
I believe in the Constitution. I believe that one case, the right case, can change the world. If you believe this too, Freedom Counsel is for you. Pursuing a major case can be overwhelming, but we provide a community of practice so that you have the resources available to support your case. My name is Warner Mendenhall, and we are Freedom Counsel. Join Freedom Counsel today. freedomcounsel.org.